A single resource helped redraw maps, restructure empires, mechanize war, expand suburbs, power global shipping, and bind modern life to a network of wells, refineries, pipelines, tankers, and sea lanes. It did not do this because it was rare. It did it because it was useful in exactly the ways the modern world began to demand. Oil did not simply fuel the 20th century. It helped organize it, and even now, in an age of electric vehicles, climate targets, and renewable expansion, oil remains deeply embedded in transport, military planning, petrochemicals, and the physical movement of goods across the planet. So the real question is not why oil mattered once, it is why it became so powerful that entire systems of trade, finance, security, and diplomacy were built around keeping it moving. The common story about oil is that it became important because the world needed energy. That is true, but incomplete. Coal also powered industry. Gas also heats cities. Electricity also transformed modern life. Yet oil acquired a particular kind of influence that went beyond energy supply alone. It became the resource of motion. It powered cars, trucks, aircraft, shipping, armored warfare, and later the global supply chains that connected factories, ports, and consumers. It could be stored, transported, refined into many products, and used across civilian industry and military systems alike. That combination made oil more than a fuel. It became infrastructure in liquid form. Once cities, militaries, corporations, and trade routes were built around it, oil ceased to be just another commodity. It became a strategic foundation, and from that point onward, control over oil fields, transit corridors, refining capacity, and maritime choke points began to carry a different weight. Local geology became global politics. Oil had been used in limited ways for centuries, but the modern petroleum industry began in the 19th century, initially as a source of kerosene for lighting. Commercial wells in places such as Pennsylvania and Russia created a new business around illumination at a time when cities and households wanted something cleaner and more scalable than older lighting fuels. At that stage, oil was important, but not yet dominant. Its early success was tied to lamps. Its deeper success came later, through engines. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the industry expanded rapidly in the United States, especially in Pennsylvania, then Texas, and California. Standard Oil emerged as one of the most powerful firms of the era by integrating drilling, refining, transport, and distribution into a single system. This was one of the first signs that oil's power would come not only from the resource itself, but from the institutions built around it. Still, coal remained central to railways, steamships, and heavy industry. The real breakthrough came when the internal combustion engine spread across civilian and military life. Automobiles created mass demand for gasoline. Trucks transformed logistics. Aircraft made high-energy liquid fuel essential. Navies began shifting from coal to oil because oil enabled greater speed, range, and operational efficiency. This was the turning point. Oil's physical properties aligned with the new machines of movement. That alignment changed history. The First and Second World Wars accelerated oil's rise from useful fuel to strategic necessity. Armies that once depended heavily on horses and railways increasingly relied on trucks, tanks, aircraft, and motorized logistics. Navies powered by oil could maneuver faster and operate more flexibly than coal-based fleets. Air power, which became central to 20th century warfare, was impossible without refined petroleum. This meant oil was no longer just about economic growth. It was now bound to survival, military reach, and the ability to wage industrial war. Access to oil fields and sea routes became war aims in their own right. The difference between having secure fuel and lacking it could shape entire campaigns. Allied access to American and Middle Eastern oil contrasted sharply with the constraints faced by Axis powers. Oil abundance was not the only reason one side prevailed, but it was one of the conditions that made sustained, mechanized warfare possible. Once a resource becomes essential to both civilian prosperity and military effectiveness, its political value changes. From that point onward, states do not merely buy it. They plan around it, they fight around it, they build alliances around it. At this point, the obvious question appears: why oil and not coal, electricity, or some other energy source? The answer is not that oil was universally better at everything. It is that oil was better at movement, high energy density, relative portability, versatility in refining, suitability for engines, aircraft, ships, and vehicles. These made it the ideal fuel for an era increasingly defined by mobility, scale, and speed. The modern world was becoming a world of motion. Oil arrived as the resource best suited to power it. After 1945, oil moved from strategic necessity to everyday normality. Cheap and abundant petroleum underpinned the post-war economic boom in North America, Europe, and later East Asia. Mass car ownership expanded. Suburbs spread outward. Aviation became central to business and tourism. Plastics, fertilizers, synthetic fibers, and countless industrial materials emerged from petrochemical chains tied to refining. This is one of the most important features of oil's history. Its power did not come from transport alone. It also came from its reach into materials, manufacturing, and consumer life. Oil helped power the road network, but it also entered packaging, medicine, clothing, construction, and agriculture. It became part of the background architecture of ordinary life. Meanwhile, control over global oil was changing. Earlier in the century, large Western companies dominated much of production and pricing. Over time, producing states sought greater control through nationalization and the rise of national oil companies. The formation of OPEC in 1960 signaled a major shift. Producers were no longer willing to remain passive suppliers inside a system largely shaped elsewhere. This was not the end of interdependence, but it did change bargaining power. Oil was now not just a resource extracted by companies. It was a sovereign asset tied directly to state revenue, foreign policy, and national development. For decades, many importing countries treated oil dependence as manageable. Then the 1970s exposed the strategic risk. The 1973 and 1974 oil shock, following the Arab-Israeli War and embargo decisions, showed that producers could use oil not only for income, but for leverage. Prices surged. Importing economies felt immediate pain. Energy security became a political issue in households, cabinet rooms, and central banks. Then came the second shock, linked to the Iranian Revolution and the Iran-Iraq War. If you value calm, in-depth explanations like this, subscribe to Beneath Systems for more videos that uncover the systems shaping our world. The lesson deepened. Oil was not just important because the world consumed a lot of it. It was powerful because supply was concentrated, alternatives were limited, and disruption could move quickly through inflation, recession, and political instability. From that point onward, major powers treated oil flows as part of national security. Strategic reserves were built, maritime choke points received more military attention, alliances in producing regions acquired greater importance, importers sought diversification, exporters recognized the leverage that concentration could create. Oil had always mattered. Now its political meaning was visible to everyone. Several structural factors explain why oil gained such exceptional power. First, energy density and versatility. Oil stores a large amount of usable energy in a compact form. It can be refined into gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, lubricants, petrochemical feedstocks, and more. This makes it unusually adaptable across sectors. Second, infrastructure lock-in. Once roads, suburbs, ports, airports, vehicle fleets, and supply chains are built around liquid fuel, switching becomes difficult. Oil's importance is reinforced by everything designed to consume it. Third, geological concentration. Large, low-cost reserves are not evenly distributed. They are clustered in specific regions, especially the Middle East, Russia, and parts of the Americas. That concentration creates asymmetric dependence between producers and importers. Fourth, institutional power. Oil did not become powerful through geology alone. It was organized through companies, states, cartels, national oil firms, futures markets, and shipping systems. Each layer increased its embedded role in economic life. Fifth, military value, a resource that powers mechanized armies, aircraft, naval fleets, and logistics chains, acquires strategic importance beyond price alone. Once fuel availability shapes military readiness, oil becomes part of alliance structure and defense planning. These factors combined to make oil not just useful, but systemically central. So was oil powerful because it was physically superior, or because institutions were built to keep it central? The answer is both. Its physical properties created the opportunity, but institutions, infrastructure, and strategy turned that opportunity into dependence. Oil became powerful not only because the world found it, but because the world organized itself around it. Across the last century and a half, certain patterns repeat. One is the shift from company control to state control. Early on, firms such as Standard Oil and later the so-called major international oil companies dominated production, refining, and transport. Over time, producing states nationalized resources and built their own institutions. This did not eliminate private actors, but it made oil revenue central to state budgets and political order. Another pattern is boom and bust. Oil markets swing between scarcity and glut. High prices encourage investment and expansion. Oversupply eventually pushes prices down. Price collapse then reduces investment and sets the stage for later tightness. These cycles shape not only corporate profits, but fiscal stability in producer states and inflation risk in importing ones. A third pattern is the militarization of choke points and routes. The Strait of Hormuz, the Suez Canal, Bab el-Mandeb, Malacca. These places matter because oil must move. Once movement becomes essential, sea lane security becomes a standing strategic concern. A fourth pattern is the weaponization of supply. Embargoes, sanctions, production cuts, price wars, transit threats. Energy can be used coercively. And because modern economies depend on reliable fuel, even limited disruptions can have outsized effects. And finally, there is interdependence. Exporters depend on revenue. Importers depend on supply. Neither side is fully independent. This creates both cooperation and leverage, stability and friction, all at once. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, oil became even more deeply integrated into the wider system. Demand rose sharply with industrial growth in China and other emerging economies. Supply chains lengthened across oceans. Benchmark prices influenced inflation, transport costs, and investment decisions everywhere. Financial markets built extensive derivatives around oil, making it not only a physical commodity, but a financial instrument embedded in portfolios, hedging strategies, and macroeconomic expectations. This added a new layer of complexity. Oil prices no longer responded only to barrels produced and consumed. They also responded to expectations, investor behavior, geopolitical risk, and broader financial conditions. At the same time, new production technologies such as hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling changed the supply map. The United States, once seen mainly as a major importer, became the world's largest producer by the 2010s. This altered trade flows and strategic assumptions, but it did not remove oil's centrality. If anything, it showed that the structure could adapt without disappearing. Oil remained powerful even as its geography changed. Today, the major debate is not whether oil mattered. It is how long its dominance will last. Climate policy, renewable power, batteries, and electrification are all expanding. Efficiency has improved. Some sectors are beginning to reduce oil intensity, yet total global demand remains high, and recent estimates place world consumption at roughly 103 million barrels per day in 2025. This suggests not a sudden collapse, but a long transition. Oil's role may shrink in some sectors, especially passenger transport, but remain stubborn in others, particularly aviation, shipping, heavy transport, petrochemicals, and military systems. Even a world using less oil can remain geopolitically shaped by oil for decades. This is a critical distinction. A declining share does not mean disappearing importance, especially when so much infrastructure, finance, and state revenue is still tied to petroleum. There is also a lesser-known point worth emphasizing. Oil's dominance was never inevitable. In the late 19th century, petroleum's early lighting business faced pressure from electrification. Oil's long-term survival as the central energy resource depended on a technological path that favored gasoline engines, road transport, aviation, plastics, and petrochemical industrialization. In other words, oil became powerful because it matched the needs of a particular kind of modernity. A world designed around highways, container shipping, aviation, mechanized warfare, and fossil-based industrial chemistry was a world in which oil would become central. If different technologies had scaled differently, the hierarchy of energy might have looked different too. That does not make oil's power unreal. It makes it historical, and anything historical can eventually be changed, though never quickly and never without cost. Oil became the most powerful resource on Earth because it arrived at the right technological moment with the right physical properties and then accumulated layers of dependence around itself. It powered motion. It fed industry. It enabled military reach. It shaped alliances. It transformed local geology into global power. Over time, the world built roads, wars, suburbs, air networks, petrochemical industries, and financial systems that all assumed oil would keep flowing. That assumption became one of the hidden foundations of modern life, which is why the politics of oil have never been just about energy. They have been about mobility, security, security, growth, inflation, sovereignty, and control over the systems that make the modern world function. Even now, as the energy transition gathers pace, the architecture built around oil does not simply vanish. It persists, adapts, and resists replacement because it is embedded not only in engines and refineries, but in institutions and habits. Oil is no longer merely a commodity the world consumes. It is a resource around which the modern world was built, and that is why its power has lasted so long. If this video gave you a clearer way to understand the world beneath the surface, subscribe to Beneath Systems for more deep dives every week.